Okay, so the Attack on Titan manga was published for over a decade, and during that time there's one specific panel that's become more infamous than anything else. As of making this video, there have been countless memes, fan animations, and even a whole subreddit with thousands of members dedicated to this one particular scene. In case you have no idea what I'm talking about, in the final chapter of Attack on Titan, Eren and Armin have a heartfelt conversation about Mikasa. During this exchange, Armin wonders if she'll ever be able to move on with her life and find a boyfriend or husband after Eren dies, and in response to this, Eren loses his mind and throws a tantrum inside the past dimension. With tears in his eyes, he tells Armin, "No, I don't want that. I want her to think about me and no one else for the rest of her life. Mikasa finding another man? Even after I die, I want her to be hung up on me for a while, 10 years at least." As you'd expect, it didn't take long for this to ironically become one of Eren's most memorable quotes, in particular the first line and the last line. To many people, the wording here just didn't sound like something he would say, and even Armin was surprised by just how pathetic it was. That's why today we're about to explain the truth about this moment. Specifically, does it detract from Eren's character, or was it a perfectly reasonable thing to include? Throughout this video, I'll be as fair as I can to the two different perspectives, and at the end I'll tell you how my own opinion has changed in the time since the chapter was released. Alright, so the first place we need to start is with Isayama himself, who actually spoke about this scene during an interview last year. In that interview, he said the idea suddenly came to him as he was drawing the final chapter, because in his words, he's always loved whiny Eren. For that reason, this segment was him trying to take the character back to his roots, and he even thought to himself Eren is back once he'd finished drawing it. Now, whether you love this panel or hate it, I think we can all agree that Eren has had a ton of emotional outbursts over the years, and so the whiny Eren that Isayama is referring to isn't anything new. As an example, there was the time he couldn't work out how to use the ODM gear, the time he broke down in front of Ramsey, or the time he straight up asked Historia to kill him, and you can see how his behavior in scenes like this laid the foundation for this. Obviously, there are differences that we'll be talking about later, but for now, we need to acknowledge that Eren has never been afraid of showing emotional vulnerability. Bearing that in mind, his outburst to Armin was not only perfectly in line with his core character, but it was also a way for Isayama to demonstrate how repressed Eren has been. From the moment he kissed Historia's hand and saw the future, he wasn't allowed to tell anyone what he knew or express his true feelings about it, even though he probably wanted to. His horrified face at the medal ceremony was the closest anyone got to seeing his real emotions, but for pretty much the entire time after that, he kept his secrets to himself. This extreme isolation is something Armin acknowledges in the final chapter, and it means Eren's tantrum in pause was actually 4 years worth of repressed feelings coming to the surface. During those 4 tragic years, he failed at finding an alternative to the rumbling, he failed at keeping all of his friends alive, his one attempt at romance didn't work, and the founding Titan made him kill his own mother. On top of that, he knew he was destined to die no matter what happened, which would be a huge mental burden for anyone, let alone a 19-year-old. Considering all of that, his emotions in the final chapter shouldn't be as controversial as it is, but what's clear is that the time skip distorted our view of who he is as a character. What I mean is that when season 4 came around, we were introduced to an older version of Eren who was manipulative, ruthless, and seemingly willing to put his friends in danger. Based on his actions, it was easy to assume that Eren had organically turned into this person during the 4-year time skip. However, now that we have all the facts, we can see that for most of the time skip he didn't act like this. It was only once Mikasa rejected him that he fully committed to being Chad Eren, and that's because after this rejection, he felt that his only remaining option was to do the rumbling, and to do the rumbling it was practical to adopt this detached persona. If Mikasa had given him the answer he wanted to hear, then we all know he would have ran away with her, and Chad Eren never would have existed, because that personality was just a necessary evil that he needed to set the rumbling in motion. It wasn't until the last chapter that he was finally able to drop the mask when no one else was around except Armin, and since Eren has nothing more left to lose, he just lets it all out. In addition, there are 2 other reasons why this panel isn't so bad, and the first is that Isayama clearly wanted this scene to have a comedic element to it, evidenced not just by the over-the-top pathetic dialogue, but also by this panel that happens a second earlier. Humor is something that had been almost totally missing because of the whole global genocide thing, but with the fighting now completely finished, this was one of the very few chances to inject a tiny bit of comedy before the end. The second point is that underneath the humor, it's plain to see that Eren is suffering here, which plays into one of the main messages of the series. Attack on Titan was super direct in pushing the message that genocide is wrong, and so one way of looking at this panel is that it's a form of punishment. Having committed the worst act of violence in human history, it would be wrong for the story to end with a happy Eren being satisfied with the way things played out. Instead, what we got was a sad teenager who was scared to die, scared that his crush might forget about him, and who at least acknowledges that what he did was wrong, even if he doesn't regret it, which in the context of this message was arguably the right thing to draw. With all that said, it's time to switch over to the reasons this panel doesn't work, and I think we need to begin with Mikasa. Despite Eren's love for her being the main topic of his meltdown, the romance between these two is something that was massively underdeveloped. The truth is that for 99% of the series, Eren didn't treat Mikasa like someone he was in love with, and this is something Isayama himself was aware of. In an interview he did a couple of years before the manga ended, he said that for Eren, rather than a lover, Mikasa's presence is more like a mother to him. The love towards a mother is considered valuable, however at the same time there are annoying parts as well. As an audience, we also saw for ourselves that he mostly behaved around her the same way he did with Armin, and their relationship mostly seemed like one between family members. I know some people might argue that Eren was just too busy with his goals to focus on romance, but even if that's true, if he's in love with her then there would have been more clues in his behaviour to indicate that was the case. In reality, Jean was the one who displayed a more solid romantic interest in Mikasa, evidenced by him complimenting her looks, getting nervous around her, and fantasizing about their potential future. In Eren's case, he did virtually none of that, and the closest thing we got was during the season 2 finale when there was the chance for a kiss, but when the kiss never materialized, it wasn't until years later that Eren mentioned anything remotely romantic again. By that time, he had been avoiding the subject for so long that Mikasa almost didn't know how to react, and despite being in love with him, she gave the answer that was most likely to preserve their existing friendship. Because of that, these two actually being a couple isn't something that was ever firmly established, especially at this point in the timeline. And so when Eren melts down about Mikasa potentially finding another man, it just feels kind of unearned. What makes it even worse is the exact language he uses, for instance when he says he wants her to be hung up on him for 10 years at least. One thing we need to understand about all his previous outbursts is that, regardless of the situation, Eren never stopped sounding like himself, like the words he was saying still sounded right coming from his mouth. With chapter 139 though, I'm struggling to think of a time he's ever been this level of whiny. Even when he was 10 years old, I don't think it would have been this bad. As a result, the problem with this moment isn't the fact that Eren is having a tantrum, but rather it's the excessively pathetic dialogue that takes things beyond the realm of what you'd ever expect to hear from this character. The fact it also comes at the very end of the manga doesn't really help, since for most fans of Eren it leaves a bad taste in the mouth for this to be one of the last things we ever hear him say. You could even argue that although this moment is meant to be comedic, which sort of justifies it being over the top, the final moments of the main character isn't really the time to be trying to get laughs. After everything Eren's been through and after everything he's done, there's not really anything funny about this situation, and so it's a weird way to send off one of the most iconic anime characters. All I'm saying is that you could have had this exact same moment but with the dialogue being toned down a bit to make it more believable and less jokey, and I think if that was the case, a lot of people wouldn't have had any problems. Of course, you still get that tiny 1% of fans who think that Eren is meant to be a Terminator who doesn't display any real emotion, but for everyone else, it would have been so much easier to read this panel if it had the same level of believability as his past outbursts over the years. Now, in terms of my own personal opinion, when the final chapter came out, this panel definitely caught me by surprise. In fact, for any of you who haven't seen my original review, my thinking at the time was that this dialogue was the result of the founder messing with his head. It was easy to think that because firstly, Eren basically confirmed it was making him crazy, and secondly, the dialogue seemed so out of character that it felt like the only rational explanation. Since then, we've all had more time to think about it, and my thoughts can pretty much be summarized by answering these 3 questions. The first being whether I can see why Isayama did it. To answer that, I'd say yes, I can see why he would want to do this, for all the reasons that we mentioned in the first half of the video. But if someone was to go back in time and convince him to write the dialogue more differently, more in line with the whiny Eren that we knew, then I think it would have been perfectly fine. Like I said before, Eren having a meltdown is completely justified, especially because of how repressed he was. So if it was written differently, then I think most reasonable fans wouldn't have any issue. However, the reality is that in its current form, I can't say it was a good thing for this series, because although the meaning of this panel is clear, it's unfortunately let down by the dialogue and became an iconic moment for all the wrong reasons. That being said, let me know your thoughts about this in the comments down below. Do you think it's fine in its current form, or do you think it should have been changed, or do you think it should have just been removed entirely? Let me know down below, and if you haven't already, then sub to the channel as we are on that long road to 500k subs. Thanks for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.